everybody. I'm Kathleen McElroy. I'm director of the School of Journalism here at the University of Texas at Austin. And I am so happy to host this sort of chat, conversation, discussion with two of our distinguished alumni. Jamie Stockwell got a Bachelor of Journalism in '99, and with John Schwartz, who got a Plan 2 degree in 1979 and a JD from UT in 1984, and in that time was also editor of the Daily Texan. And they are both at the New York Times. Jamie is a deputy national editor, and John is the climate change reporter for the Times. And we're just here to talk about how things are at the Times. Let's try to keep up at the Times. Let's talk about journalism at the Times and journalism in general. So first of all, I want to thank Jamie and John for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Kathleen. Yeah.
So we got some questions early on from some of the alumni who are watching this. And one of the first questions was, how did the Times newsroom look before the pandemic, and what does it look like now?
I can go first if you want, John. But before the pandemic, we had hundreds and hundreds of journalists inside of a beautiful office down in Times Square. We were all in several conference rooms and meetings, and there was a lot of hustle and bustle in the newsroom to cover what was already a pretty big story internationally. And if you'll remember, it feels like already a lifetime ago, but we had the impeachment of a president. We had all these other big stories we were handling at the beginning of the year. And then boom, the virus hits the United States. It starts up in Washington state. It makes its way. And then out of just an abundance of caution, everybody was asked to begin working remotely in the middle of March. And so today, the beautiful building on 8th Avenue in Times Square is empty. That it is dark. And there are a few necessary employees who are there, who are watering plants, who are keeping things going so that when we show up, there aren't going to be, rodents and anything
Legionnaire's
wild
disease
and like anything strange in our building. But it's empty. And I think I speak for a whole lot of us when I say we miss that physical building and being together. But we're all working remotely right now, and we are putting out a newspaper. We're putting out fantastic journalism on our website, on the daily podcast, and a number of other platforms. And we're doing it all from our homes, whether they are here in New York and any of the boroughs or across the country and world. Yeah.
And to me, I've got two images in my mind, which is the last time they had Pulitzer Day. And Kathleen, you've been there. Hundreds and hundreds of people gather in the Times atrium on 2 floors, crowded together, celebrating the prizes that the Times has won in that year. And this year it was all virtual. We had people addressing us from video screens. It couldn't have felt different. Nobody was in the newsroom. And I've got to say, I went back through my pictures of everybody standing shoulder to shoulder and thought, oh my God, my whole way of looking at moments like that had changed. But so we're all over the place. I'm at my house. Jamie's at her place.
You're in New Jersey.
I'm in New Jersey, and the Garden State. And the point is that journalists just about invented remote work, and we have filed from everywhere, and we know how to do this. And so the amount of disruption, aside from that feeling of not being able to bump into each other and come up with stories and have this great time together, that mixture that comes when you're all in the newsroom together, the work we can do. We know how to do this.
Mm-hmm. Can do the work. It's that creative brainstorming, as John mentioned. I loved running into John in the hallway and talking about our Texas roots, and all the other people who you just randomly run into, and then it sparks an idea for
free books everywhere.
Free books,
yeah,
and free food. And you know what? We're missing, John, our summer of ice cream. Last summer we had ice cream every Wednesday or brewery, a different brewery from the five
Right.
boroughs would come in. And so I guess we're not going to have that this summer.
And the number of cakes that are spread around the newsroom when
Yeah.
anyone is leaving, when anyone is coming, when anybody has something to celebrate, there's cake. Whenever there's a meeting, there's food left over, there's food. I have lost weight in
You're
social
the only
isolation.
one who doesn't have the COVID-19. The rest of us,
I can't tell you, I expected to gain, but wow.
You know,
you famously asked. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, we've had new employees start since we started working remotely. And in fact, we had our new class of fellows start this past Monday. And it just has to be a disorienting, somewhat unsettling orientation. In fact, I started 2 years ago today. So I've been thinking a lot about orientation and what that is like. And it's one thing to do it in person. It's another to do it from your living room, wherever these fellows are. So we're going to be toasting them at 4 p.m. today
Oh, wow.
virtually. So that'll be nice.
And by the way, so everyone knows, Alison Waller, who is class of 2020, is among the New York Times fellows, and we're very, very proud of her. So we're adding more UT, more burnt orange.
That's great. Hook 'em.
To it. So, John and Jamie and I were talking earlier. I remember that when things would happen, how you had to run to the building, because I worked at the Times for 20 years. But John, you were saying like after the blackout in 2003, I think it was, I could have the year wrong. Once we all figured out we weren't being attacked again, you were talking about how technology has changed even since then.
Well, exactly. At that time, I was working on my laptop and the lights went out. And of course, my laptop had a battery and it kept working and I kept working. And those of us who had laptops were sort of called to a pod of desks in the middle of the floor, and we processed the copy as people made their phone calls, took notes, and handed us scraps of paper. And that's how we got the paper out. Well, who doesn't have a laptop today? That was the sign everybody needed. It said, get out there and have this technology ready. And we have drills where just before the virus hit, we had a drill where everybody in the climate group was told, on a day, and you don't know what day it'll be, we're going to tell you that you're working from home. And so you'd better be ready with not just your laptops and whatever other equipment you need, but all of the software so that you can get into our unique content management system. And deal with editing and being edited and dealing with the photos, all the stuff that we do, be ready to do. And what a great time for a dry run that was.
Wow.
Sure.
Speaking of which, and I'll direct this to both of you, someone else asked, how do reporters cope? Okay, so we've been talking about editing from here or reporting remotely, but the reporters who are out in the field dealing with COVID and covering protests, even like being at the White House or at the Capitol Hill these days, I mean, has that changed? I guess it has to have changed in the age of COVID, right?
It has. I think one thing that has really evolved in journalism in my 20 years doing it is how open we all are now about the effects, the emotional and mental toll that covering these kinds of stories takes. We don't always have to be so tough. And so one thing that the New York Times has done over the last year and a half, and something that we've done since we've all started working from home, is we've brought in this psychologist who has done these like group meetings to talk about what it means to cover these kinds of stories, the mental and emotional toll it can take, why it's important to find moments where you can relax with your family, where you can go and do something outdoors, where self-care being extremely important, sleep being extremely important, and just having those open conversations. And so we've talked a lot, both with the psychologist, but then also as a team with our reporters on the national desk in particular, because these guys, they have been out at hospitals and then over the last couple of weeks covering protests and just like really understanding that people need time too. We can't, I have one reporter who has been working, I think, every day since right before Memorial Day, and
Oh my gosh.
he needs a few days off. Like we are, very conscientious of that and not wanting people to get to a point where they break, and just being aware.
Back in the old days, we sent John to New Orleans for Katrina for long stretches. And I mean, that had to have been hard, John,
Well,
I can't
I mean,
imagine.
you're surrounded by a lot of grief. But it's not like the time I spent reporting in Ferguson where there was grief and tear gas, right? So I was not one of the long-term Ferguson people. I was there for most of 1 week at the beginning, but so I don't want to make great claims of experience, but I spent a lot of time for more than 2 years going back to New Orleans and covering the rebuilding of the levees and everything else, and you do feel it. You pick up the loss from people, and in the same way that I had the reaction from thinking about the newsroom, even now when I am out on the street and hear water running, like from a culvert I can't see, I get a flutter.
Oh, wow.
Water still does it to me. So we all carry with us everything we've reported.
Yeah, we do. And I remember I covered the sniper shootings in Washington, not quite
And
20
both
years
of you
ago,
have
but a long time
Washington
ago.
Post backgrounds, yeah.
We do. We met each other at the Washington Post. Having covered that, I covered it. It was about 3 weeks straight, and there was very, very little sleep each of those days. I mean, it was like 20 hours of work a day. But I think that when you're a reporter and you're covering something and you're immersed in the story, the adrenaline of it all, and just knowing that there is so much work to do because you just want to get everything that you possibly can to get it down for the reader. There's just no time to really stop and process and think about it. And I covered 9/11 too, until you're past the story for a while. And I don't know about you, John, but after the sniper shootings, I think I ended up with the flu, laryngitis, a stomach bug, like everything just kind of hits at once. And it's the body's way of saying, okay, now you need to take some time and process. But it's hard to process in the moment. I think a lot of us journalists kind of fail at that in the moment. The story is top of mind. It's too important.
Well, and you feel, right, this is an overused phrase, but you absolutely feel the need to bear witness.
Totally.
You need, you're there for the people who were lost. You're there for the people who don't understand. You're there for the people who want to grab an official by the shoulders and say, why did this happen? And so you just feel you can't let those people down.
Totally. Yeah.
Someone asked an interesting question that sort of fits into what you all are talking about, and that's the average age of a New York Times reporter. Let's not include the fellows, who can be anywhere from, I guess, 21 to 30 or so. But what would you say is the average age of someone who reaches a reporter journalist at the New York Times? And this is a guess.
Gosh, I don't know. John, what do you think?
I don't have a number, but I know it's younger than it used to be. I mean, I got to the Times in my 40s and felt so young as I walked around the newsroom. I felt like this vital, new kid.
Yeah.
And
maybe mid 30s.
Yeah. Now I would feel that it's hugely closer to that spot on the demographic, like in the 30s.
Now, yeah, certainly there are a lot of roles where you do see people in their mid and late 20s on our digital team and social team.
But also reporters. Herndon is, it's what,
maybe
he's
not even 30,
right?
Yeah, not even 30, I don't think.
Not even 30. I mean, I keep talking to reporters and asking them about their lives and finding out that they are younger than some of my children. And that's great. I don't hate them at all for that. I think it's wonderful. But I mean, I think about where I was and what I could have pulled together as a story at 27. And I look at what these folks are doing, and it reminds me of my time taking my daughter to see the Plan 2 program when she was looking for colleges. And we went to Charles Rossman's English class as a part of our tour. And they were doing this amazing discussion of Ulysses. And I talked to him afterwards. He remembered me. It was wonderful. And I said, I thought we did Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man when we did Joyce. He said, oh yeah, I never would have tried to get you guys to read Ulysses. And I thought, oh God, they are smarter. It's just generational.
You know, and I actually asked Dean this at a South by, Dean Baquet at a South by Southwest event. The Times is getting younger people because that pipeline to the Times is very different. Jamie, you came from the Express News not too long ago.
That's right.
John and I joined the Times after X number of years in the profession. So it's almost like we're the dinosaurs of how you get there now.
People are coming for all kinds of routes. Go ahead, John. Yeah.
Oh no, I was just going to say, when I was hired, they told me that it was, you know, that I was following the traditional path of mid-career transition of the New York Times. And I was deeply troubled by that because I didn't know I was in mid-career.
I took a little bit of a different route. A lot of people you see arrive at the Times after having spent time first at maybe a smaller local newspaper, then maybe, or newsroom, and then maybe a larger one and a larger one, and then maybe the Washington Post and then the New York Times. And I started at the Washington Post, and then I returned to Texas and
well,
to San Antonio.
You'd interned at the Post, right?
I started as a summer intern. That's right. I started as a summer intern the summer of '99, and then I stayed for about 8 years, returned to Texas, and was thrilled to return to Texas and to be closer to my family and to really just try to give back to South Texas that had raised me. And then after, 11 years there, I jumped over and made the move to the New York Times. And what I appreciate about that path is that I had the perspective of a reporter at a national outlet, and then I was able to get a lot of experience in a local newsroom to really understand the crisis facing local journalism and the issues facing local journalism. And then now back in a national newsroom where, you know, we are trying to do a lot of work today in partnerships with local newsrooms.
And could I just break in and say that the Times has really whooped up on coverage of the crisis in local journalism, and it's Jamie doing it.
John,
yes,
that's very sweet. Well, John,
it's true.
Well, John did a really great 3-part series with the New Orleans paper that's been my inspiration that I always refer back to. That was in 2018, I think, April of 2018. March or April, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. On a side note, we're working on we want to help save rural papers in Texas too. So I may enlist you all in that project.
We are very much looking at that. I mean, and you look across the country over the last 15 years, something like 2,000 newspapers have either folded or merged. That's like 1 out of every 5 newspapers in this country. A lot of them are weeklies. A lot of them are in Texas and New York State and California. The biggest states have just lost a tremendous number of weeklies. And then you look at the news deserts and where they are, and it's scary, it's sad. But in fact, we're going to be launching, it'll be announced soon. We're talking to our partners tomorrow, but we're going to be looking at joblessness across America in the wake of the coronavirus. And we have a dozen partners who we're going to be working with.
That sounds so good. Oh, one thing I will say is that we've been hardened by looking at the numbers that Texas, the news deserts aren't quite as bad as we thought. And we're now working on succession. So if any of the alumni are interested in owning a wonderful small paper or a weekly paper in Texas, write to me, because we can tell you some places where they're doing amazing journalism and they're making money. It's just the family doesn't want to take it over. So sorry about that shameless plug.
No, I think that's really exciting. I think that the Marfa newspaper, the Sentinel, is doing something really interesting because it's become a community hub.
Yes.
It made the newsroom a community hub. So there's lots of really cool things happening in Texas.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you all about the recent newsroom controversy or whatever over the Cotton op-ed piece. Now, don't want to talk about Bennett, don't want to talk about whether that piece should have run or not run, but just give us some little insider on what the newsroom was like when all of that was going on.
John, you want to go first? Or I can
guess,
go first. It doesn't matter.
Well, I can start. The thing that amazed me about it was that it was, don't call it a revolt, don't call it an uprising. It was none of those things, but it was a really big discussion. And it took place virtually in Slack, the communications program that is like AOL chat rooms on steroids and is the bane of my existence. But there was a channel with a couple of thousand people in it. And they were having real discussions, talking about what that op-ed meant to them, raising their complaints, sure, but also giving their vision of what the paper ought to be. It was a remarkable outpouring of not just feeling, but of just a lot of serious thinking about what the incident meant to the newsroom, to the institution, and to the people involved in it. I found it inspiring.
I did too. And I was the 864th person to join that Slack channel because I remember when I joined it and I saw how many were in that Slack channel, I thought, wow, that's a lot of people. And by the end of that day, there were more than 2,000 people in that Slack channel. I don't know how many are in it now. I don't
think there are 2,000 employees at the Times these days.
There are 4,600 employees company-wide.
Wow. That's right, company-wide. Okay.
But the newsroom is about 1,700. So clearly there were a number of people who aren't in the newsroom who are joining the Slack channel and chiming in. And I found it uplifting in some ways and inspiring in other ways, and just very heartening because there is such a tremendously thoughtful dialogue in the Slack channel. And what it came down to, I think, in the newsroom, and I can only speak for the national desk because I only know this desk in my 2 years there, but we have very thoughtful, critical discussions every day about how stories are framed, whether they meet our expectations. We have a very high bar. Do they rise to that bar? And then a number of us get involved with, even if it's a story that I'm not the primary editor, I will read it. Particularly the sensitive stories in particular. Our national desk editor, Mark Lacey, he reads every story that national reporter writes. And so there is a lot of discussion among us, how stories are framed, whether anything, there needs to be more reporting. And I think that's what angered so many people in the newsroom about, it was really about the breakdown in the editorial process and the process being very different on the opinion side. I don't think anybody disagrees with the idea that we need to publish a wide range of opinions and thoughts, and we need to be a place where you can come to have your own assumptions challenged and your own thoughts challenged, and you should be reading the views of other people, whether you agree or don't agree.
And when she says editorial process, she means just the production of the content, not necessarily editorial versus news.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. The process in which a story is assigned and then written and then framed and then edited and all of that.
Yeah.
Vigorous process.
Now I have some questions. Oh, by the way, someone also asked, how do you become a freelance writer? And how do you get your Rolodex of people outside of the staff?
That's it. Well, on the national desk, we rely a whole lot on people across the country. So we have bureaus all around the country. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud that we have reporters living in the communities they cover or the regions that they cover. But we couldn't do what we do without an army of stringers and freelancers across the country who help us in whether it's a very minor story or a hugely significant one like the one we are covering right now. And oftentimes it's just through word of mouth. Like if we're looking for somebody in a community where we don't have a stringer, I'll often reach out to somebody like you. So I reach out to a journalism professor to ask about a student journalist who may have some time to do some work for us. We look at reporters from some of the local papers who are not reporters anymore, maybe are doing something else, but still have that energy and that desire and passion. But I would, if anybody is listening who is interested in freelancing or stringing for us, please, I will give you my email address and phone number at the end, and you can please reach out, send me your resume. But we're always looking to add to our roster. We have a spreadsheet that is really deep, and we're really grateful for it.
You know, it's sad to say when something awful happens in Texas, like the Sutherland Springs shootings or other stuff like that, a lot of our students end up with bylines in the Washington Post and the Times or LA Times like that. So that is a route.
It didn't even occur to me in college to do that. It is great. I don't, maybe when I was in college, you know, we didn't even
Nothing bad happened when you were in college. That's what it was.
It's too, things were too good.
Things were too good, but we didn't, I mean, we barely had cell phones. We certainly didn't have social media. So
it's true, but also, you know, one of the things about the Times, and I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because people think the New York Times is a bunch of Northeastern somethings. You know, when in fact we come from everywhere. You know, the three of us came from Texas. We've worked at the Times. You worked at the Times. When the shooting happened at the high school and middle school in Santa Fe, that was close to Galveston, my hometown. I called friends and said, who do we know there? And I was able to contribute reporting because of where I'm from. Where we're from informs everything we do.
We did that with El Paso when that happened last summer. That was, you know, a tremendous story. It was a huge story for Texas and huge across the country. But same thing. We had so many. We have quite a few Texans on staff. Actually, there are a lot of us. Yeah, gonna keep it that way.
Oh, when the thing that happened in Oklahoma, I was at Oklahoma State, and the woman plowed her car into the homecoming parade. And I got through the national desk and said, hey, I'm in Stillwater. And I mean, that I even got through and people responded, I thought shows you what an open desk it was.
Yeah, absolutely. I not to interrupt you, but I see a couple of questions in this chat.
Oh, great, because I cannot see them.
And one is from my favorite professor.
Yes.
Love him to death. Griff Singer, hello. Super thrilled to see his name there.
Oh yeah, so what has the time done regarding for safety for reporters caught in the middle of protests? Because I think you talked a lot about the emotional safety, but is there a physical, are you giving instructions?
We have, yes. Those 3 days when it was really bad last week or the week before, they've all kind of blurred together now, forgive me. We didn't really want reporters out there. I mean, we had them at a distance and we didn't want them getting too close. Certainly didn't want our stringers, because we had a lot of them around the country. Didn't want them anywhere near like the thick of it. But we talked to them about, we've given them gas masks, we've given them other masks, we've given them protective gear. We've gone through like sort of broadly training and it's not all that dissimilar in some ways to covering a war. And a lot of the training is similar in that, you know, protecting yourself and the kind of equipment you have and not having a whole lot on you, on your body. But it's been a conversation that we are continuing to have. And we never want to put anybody in a position where they're going to be feeling unsafe or scared. So,
John, there's a question for you from Wayne Miller, who seems to know you. He calls you Johnny. So since you can't travel. High school buddy. Okay. Since you're not traveling, how's it impacted the research and your writing when you can't go to a location?
There is no substitute for being there. There is no substitute. I remember flying into New Orleans the first time after Katrina on a military helicopter with that wide open side, just whatever it took to get in there. Last year, I climbed to the top of a 300-foot wind tower because the guy who I was interviewing had said, that he wasn't sure he wanted to do it and he hated heights, that he wanted to work for renewable industry. But he climbed that ladder the first time, he popped the hatch, he stood up on top of the wind turbine, and he knew, this is my career. And I wanted to be able to know that moment. And so I went and I climbed the tower, which by the way was miserable, and got to the top, popped the hatch, and it was amazing. Those moments make your stories. And without it, your stories are just a little distant, a little more distant. But you can do a lot on the phone. You can do a lot remotely with in terms of research. And then you got to go to your adverbs. You try to make up for it in the writing. I'm looking forward to being able to actually see places again, to be able to describe them, because that's what makes stories breathe.
Yeah, absolutely. We did send about 4 reporters to Minneapolis, and we are rotating them out, most of them, and sending another batch in. But that's the first time we've traveled since the pandemic began. But what we have done, we did this really great piece at the end of March, early April. It was called 24 Hours in America, and we dispatched reporters across the country just to kind of capture a scene, how life had changed, how it had been upended all across the country. And what we did, and this was just a great way of doing it, all of the reporters used a variety of tools. They either did FaceTime interviews so that they could capture, the mannerisms and the tone, and be able to breathe some of that into their vignettes. Others went to a location, but then left their phone in a spot and then backed away and just kind of observed and recorded everything. And it was, as John said, I mean, there is no substitute, but we're trying to come up with some ways where we can just get a little bit closer to the situation without physically being there. But I think we're all looking forward to when travel restrictions will be lifted for the reporters.
Yeah, but I will tell you, I have read stories by my colleagues that I have to go up and check the byline. I mean, the date line,
Exactly.
because I am absolutely convinced that they are there. But these are people with a sense of place, and they're great writers, and they figured out how to put me there, even if they can't be there themselves. It's a gift.
Someone had a question earlier for you, John, too, about, the lost respect for science. And what do you think, how did that happen? And the second part of the question, which is kind of cute, so I'll ask it, how can people walk around with Dick Tracy level devices, but not believe in climate change?
Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that the overwhelming number of Americans do understand that climate change is real, that there's been a pretty concerted and well-funded campaign to make it look like there's more doubt than there is. But the hard deny people, if you go to the Yale program on climate change communications and look at their regular surveys over years and years and years, you'll find that the hardcore deny people are down below 10%.
Oh, okay, great.
Now there's people who question it, and that's a somewhat larger percentage, just like the people who are kind of on the, who kind of understand that it's happening. That middle there, what I like to think of as the fat middle, is where I pitch my stories, because I'm never going to convince somebody who is determined not to believe. But there's a persuadable middle, and those are the people I write for, the ones who, if they get the evidence, if they hear from credible people with expertise, then, and if they see, because that's what a lot of our coverage is about, see people living with climate change in their lives, then they relate it back to things that have happened in their lives too, things that they understand. When I say it's down below 10%, it wasn't that way 10 years ago. So, so the work of journalists, the work of activists, the work of scientists and other people who communicate about science is having an effect. And not surprisingly, and we've written about this, a lot of the people who are very energetic in denying or trying to undercut or muddle the science of climate change have been very active in the last couple of months, saying the COVID numbers are too high, we're going to recover right away. There's just a general interest in making the science say what I want it to say, that we're seeing far beyond just my little beat of climate change.
Just the planet.
Tiny.
Yeah, just the planet, just the fate of the earth. But we on the climate beat have been dealing with disinformation and anti-scientific doubt for a very long time. And it's kind of fun to see other people learning how to deal with it. It's like, it's like James Franco in Ballad of Buster Scruggs, first time.
Yeah, not so. Along those same lines, and Jamie, you can add on to this. A couple of people asked about trust in journalism and how it's eroding. But can you say there's just this lack of trust in government and science and journalism, that maybe all of this kind of goes hand in hand?
Yeah, I think so. And this is actually something that we do talk about, and we think about understanding that trust is low, how we can be the trustworthy source, and transparency is key in how we do things. This is little, but I think it goes a long way. With our reporters, most of the reporters, their photos appear with their stories, and you can click on them and it takes you to a bio. A lot of our stories, we explain how the reporting was done, how the data was gathered. And I think that transparency is really important. And we know that we are living in a climate where the president of the United States has called us the failing New York Times, but we're a thriving business with more than 6 million paying subscriptions. And we're incredibly proud of our journalism. We believe that it really helps readers understand the world. We know we're called fake news, but our reporting is real and it's fact-based. And, we have a lot of reporters who are on the ground in the United States. And then in last year, I think we reported from about 160 countries. So we like to let the numbers speak for themselves, I guess, but it's a tough one.
And along those lines, everybody still wants to end up at the New York Times. I would say most journalists, especially now with video and product development, and of course, all the visuals. So we got a couple of questions about what advice would you give to high schoolers and college students interested in journalism, and what advice would you give to journalism educators?
And
Please.
To educators. Well, I'd love to hear John's thoughts too, but coming with my experience where I've been managing and editing for many years now, a couple of things. One, work at your student newspaper, work at the campus paper. And not every university campus has a newspaper anymore, but there are newsrooms, whether it's public radio, or whether it's a radio station, whether it's a magazine, whatever it is that's on your campus, work for it. And internships, those are so key, and they are still available all across the country. And it doesn't have to be the traditional route. This is going to very much date myself. When I was in college, we had to choose a path after our freshman year, after journalism 301, which was like the critical thinking for journalists class. We had to then decide.
It still is.
Is it still? We had to decide, are we going to go to the newspaper, magazine? PR was still part of Moody College back then, PR or broadcast. And I was actually quite torn because I really loved feature writing, and I wondered whether I might be better suited for a magazine. Glad I did not go down that route. No offense to any magazine writer, it wasn't for me. And Griff was actually just very instrumental. He was on the panel and who I went before, and I chose newspapers. You don't do that anymore. And now it is for journalism educators. I just believe that every reporter who is coming out of your university, out of our university, has to be very well versed in understanding how to do database reporting, has to
Yes.
understand visuals and why visuals are so important for stories, not just photography, which is immensely important, but understanding
Data
data
visualization.
visualization and interactives, and
Yeah.
understanding how to make the reporting come alive for the reader. They need to be adept at social and understand when to use social for both reporting and to, of course, get your work out there. And I've seen I was one of the judges of our judges may not be the right word, of our incoming fellowship class, which meant reading a lot of applications. And I read so many applications from students that were 2,000 plus word stories. And it's just, as somebody in college, try to get as much experience as you can writing the shorter stories that show that you can cover a breaking or developing news event, that show aptitude for like interviewing a wide range of sources and all of that. Being able to write long and narratively is great, but you're probably not going to do that as a 22-year-old. So please get experience in strong daily journalism.
That's great. And
See
by
what
the way,
John-
Griff says, great job, Jamie and John. You make us proud.
Oh,
So-
thanks, Griff.
Thank
John, your advice. And it can be
Well-
to students, to anybody, just anything about
you.
journalism.
You know, that it's almost a cliche, but if you want to write. That the more you write, whether and especially in the sort of journalism format you want to pursue, the better off you're going to be. It takes a long time to first knock the rough edges off your prose, and to sort of get to where you can write a smooth sentence without agonizing over it. And then you got to get to the part where you realize that the last 4 sentences you wrote all contained cliches, that you've got to write enough that you get sick of your writing and want to break it up and make it better.
Yeah.
And I was freelancing like crazy when I got out of school. I was writing for Texas Monthly, Texas Observer, but also many publications that no longer exist. And there are a lot of publications like that today, small ones that are hungry for what you do. I wrote for the Austin Chronicle. These folks want to hear from you. A lot of them are online only, but that's how you start. And you build up those clips and you build up that confidence that when you sit down to work, something's going to happen at the keyboard.
Yeah.
It's almost like taking the magic out of it and understanding that this is something you can do.
Understand the fundamentals,
Yeah.
mechanics. Yeah.
And then you present that work to the people you want to work for, and show them what you can do.
And
it doesn't mean it's going to happen. I mean, it's a terrible market to try to get into, but if you burn to tell stories, then that is what you will do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think curiosity is always key. That's the number one trait to look for. And if you want to write for the New York Times, read the New York Times, read it daily, understand what makes a great New York Times story. If you want to write for Texas Monthly, read Texas Monthly and understand what makes for a great Texas Monthly story. And so you get it. Reading is key. And so practicing, as John said, but also just read everything you can. Be curious.
Okay, I'm going to send the last part of this to all of our majors. John, you had another point you wanted to make?
Oh, just that when I got to Newsweek, that my various editors would say, people say there's a Newsweek style. There's not a Newsweek style. It's not. They make it sound like a straitjacket. There's not. And that was the biggest lie. And it was delightful to realize when I started that I could just imitate Newsweek style until I understood what I was doing and could do different, better, whatever.
Yeah.
But that imitation, sort of what you're talking about, read it, take it in, and then you can start to play with it.
Totally.
But you can break the rules once you understand the rules.
Absolutely. That's the best way of framing it.
So I think we're almost out of time, but Jamie, you'd promised to share your email address.
I did, yes. So my name is spelled Jamie. Do not ever spell it Jaime, and do not ever call me Mr. And then we'll be great. I get that a lot. So JAMIE.STOCKWELL is my email. Twitter is just my full name, @JamieStockwell.
And regardless of what you might have seen on the slide for John's last name, that's actually part of his Times email address. So John, would you mind sharing your email address, which
Sure,
is not your last name?
Yeah, that is right. Early on in my work on the online world, I joined an online conferencing system that had a very short space for your name. And so I compressed my name down to J. Schwartz from J. Schwartz. And I've kept it ever since. So it's J, S like Sam, W, A, T like Tom, Z like Zebra @nytimes.com.
And you know, there are so many different email addresses at the New York Times, depending on when you joined. Some it's like just last name, some it's first name and last name, some it's last name and then first name.
That's when I got there, they said, this is going to be your email address. It was going to be JOSCHW. And I said, well, let me go with J Swats, because that actually sounds a little like my name. And I've been using it for more than
like
10 years.
Joe Show or what they're trying to make you do.
Exactly. This goulash of consonants. Don't do that to me.
Well, guys, this has been awesome. I'm Kathleen McElroy. If you want to find me, look for me on the School of Journalism website. I'm not going to spell out my incredibly long email address, but I really want to thank Jamie and John. This has been delightful. It's been enlightening, and I hope we can get together more and collaborate more. And I want to thank everybody who is watching this. And, you know, this is great for journalism. It's still out there. There's still great work being done.
Absolutely.
I hope in our school and at the Times. And everybody stay safe and be kind. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. All right.
Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, y'all. Take care.